In this video, we'll look at the last looping construct in C++. It's called the do-while loop. The do-while loop begins with the do keyword followed by a block statement, then the while keyword followed by the loop control expression in parentheses. Notice that you need a semicolon at the end of the do-while statement. In a do-while loop, you execute the body of the loop while the conditional expression is true. Pretty straightforward. Note that the condition is checked at the end of each iteration. That makes the do-while loop a post-test loop. It also means that you're guaranteed that the loop body will execute at least once. This comes in very handy in many cases, so we don't have to force our way into the loop like we had to do with the while loop. Let's see an example of using the do-while loop for input validation. In this example, we execute the body of the loop, then test the condition. So we ask the user for a number between 1 and 5 and assign it to the variable number. Then we test to see if number is out of range. If it is, then we loop again. If it is in range, then the loop terminates. You can see how much cleaner the logic is in this case. Also, let me talk for a minute about the variable number. Notice how we declared it outside the loop body. Since number is used in the while loop's condition expression at the bottom, it cannot be declared within the body of the loop. If you do so, you'll get a compiler error. In this example, we're declaring selection as a character type. It's outside the loop because we're using it in the loop condition at the bottom. So let's look at the loop. I always start reading loops at their conditional expression. In this case, we know we're looping while the selection is a lowercase or an uppercase y. If the selection is any other character, the loop terminates. Now let's see what's going on in the loop body. We see we have two doubles, width and height, declared and initialized to 0. And we ask the user for these values and read them in from the keyboard. Then we're calculating the product of the width and the height and initializing another double named area with that result. We display the area to the user, and then we ask if they want to calculate another. Note that we have executed that first iteration of the loop unconditionally. That means we always execute this loop at least once. This makes sense in this case since I want to be able to calculate the area. Now we ask the user if they want to calculate another, and we read their response into the selection variable. Then we test this variable in the loop condition. If they entered a lowercase or an uppercase y, we perform another iteration of the loop and calculate another area. If they enter anything else, the loop terminates and we display thanks. The choice between a while loop and a do-while loop isn't always crystal clear. However, if you know that you must perform at least one iteration of the loop, then you should consider the do-while loop as your first alternative. Let's head over to the IDE and we'll see how we can use a do loop to do a real simple menu system. Okay, so I'm in the IDE and let me show you an example of the application we're going to build. I'll run it now and you can see it's a simple menu driven application. There's the menu, press 1, 2, 3 or Q. If you press 1, you do this. If you press 2, you do that. If you press 3, you do something else. Obviously, these selections could do any kind of behavior depending on your application. So in this case, I enter a selection, I press number 1, and it says you chose 1 doing this. If I press 2, it says you chose 2 doing that. I'll press 3. You chose 3 doing something else. Obviously, if I press a lowercase q or an uppercase q, it'll quit, but anything else should give me an illegal entry. So let's say I pressed 4. It says here unknown option, try again. Let's say I pressed P. Again, unknown option, try again. The only valid choices will be 1, 2, 3, and a lowercase or uppercase q. So now if I type a q, the program terminates and says goodbye. Okay, so that's what we're going to build. And in the section challenge, at the end of this section, you're going to be using this kind of logic to build a more complex application. All right, so let's start. Where do we start? Well, we know we need to display a menu at least one time, right? Because the user has to select Q or X or whatever we choose is the exit criteria. So that's a good choice for a do-while loop. So basically, we're doing the do part, which is display the menu while they haven't quit. Make sense? So that's what we're going to build. Now, obviously, we need a character variable, and I'll just call it selection. And whatever the user types in will be stored into that character variable. Now, let's do the do logic here. We've got a do loop, and we want to do the body of the loop while a condition is true. Now, what is that condition? Well, We want to loop as long as they haven't typed a lower or an uppercase Q. So we could do something like while selection is not equal to a lowercase q and selection is not equal to an uppercase Q. Okay, if you were thinking or here, that would not be right, and you would test your code and you'll see that it doesn't work right. So let's just write a real simple test here before we even bother with anything else. Let's just say cin selection. No menu, no prompting, no nothing. We're just going to grab a bunch of characters here and see what happens. So let's run that. Okay, let's type in an A, we loop, a Q, we stop. Cool, that's what we want. Let's try that again. A 1 we loop, a 2 we loop, a 3 we loop, 4 we loop again. The only time we should stop is when we get an lowercase or an uppercase Q, we stop. So our logic is correct here, right? Now what we can do is we can actually prompt the user, and with the menu, we could say cout, and let's just put a new line at the beginning so it gives us a new line every time. We'll do a dash of characters here, and we'll do that. And then we'll give them the menu options. So you can press 1, and if you press 1, we'll do this. Obviously, this would be, add a record or delete a record or do something in a real application. So that would be that. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it to save a little time here. Okay, so number 1. Number 2 would be do that. Number 3, or option 3 would be do something else. And then finally, we can say Q or X or whatever letter you like to quit. Perfect. And we'll give them one more little prompt here that says, and we'll put a new line in front just to separate. We'll say enter your selection. Colon, no end line here, so that it looks nicer for them. And then we input the selection right into selection. All right, so let's run this, and now we should see a menu show up. And there you go. Do this, do that, do something else, or quit. So if we press 1, we stay in the loop and we display the menu again. Same thing with 2, same thing with 3. 4 gives us the same issue because we haven't checked for anything that's illegal, right? 5, P, whatever. Now, whenever I type Q, I stop. So what I need to do now is decide what the user has typed in and what to do. Okay, how do I do that? Well, it's a lot of choices here. We've got literals here. We got 1, the 2, the 3. These are character literals, so we could certainly use a switch statement really, really easily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use an if-else-if ladder here. Again, I encourage you to do this with a switch statement with all kinds of logic. That way you can play around with it. So let's do this. Let's say if the selection that the user entered is the character 1. Remember, this is a character, so we need those single quotes. So if the user entered the 1, we simply want to say something like cout. Let's see, you chose 1, which was do this. Or let's just say doing this. Okay, we'll put an end line at the end. Else. And we don't need block statements here. We could certainly use them and it makes it easier to modify our code, but I want to try to keep as much on the screen as I can. So else, if the selection is a 2, then what we want to do here, and again, I'll just copy and paste this to save a little bit of typing time. Then let me spell that correctly. That's better. You chose 2, which was doing that. Else. And remember your indentation. Make sure the indentation is correct because it adds to the readability big time. So if the selection is equal to 3, then in this case, I'll copy that again. You chose 3, which was doing something else. And then, so now what? Where are we at? Well, let's worry about the unknown option as the bottom else of this condition. So if nothing else matches, then we're going to say, oh, sorry, try again. But in this case, if you really think about this, 1, 2, 3, and Q are all valid, right? So let's deal with Q. I'll say else if selection is equal to a Q, right? Or, and notice that here we need an or, whereas in the while we needed an and, or selection is equal to a lowercase q, then in this case, really all we want to say is goodbye, because the loop's going to fail and we're going to be out of here in a minute. Okay, so that takes care of that case. So what's left? This else state here. So what just happened? Well, it's not a 1, it's not a 2, it's not a 3, it's not a Q. It's got to be something that I don't know and I really don't care. It's something that's illegal. So in this case, we'll just say cout. Let's say something like unknown option. Let me spell that right. And maybe try again. We could do something like that. Let me clear the space up and let's walk through this and make sure we're not missing anything. We've got our selection variable declared. That's important. We're in the do loop. We're going to execute this code immediately, right? This is unconditional. The first time in, we're in. So we're displaying the menu and we're reading the selection from the user. If the user selects 1, we output you chose 1 doing this, and that's it. We're out of this if ladder. We test down here and we loop while the selection is not lowercase or uppercase q. We come back up, we display the menu again. If they typed a 3, we execute this code right here and we keep looping. If they type Q, what do? We simply say goodbye. And then this condition fires at the end. It'll fail and we're out of the loop. If none of these are true, we just say unknown option. I don't know what you've entered. Okay, so let's try this. And again, I'm in the section 9 workspace in the do while project. So let's build and run. And we've got a clean compile and a run. So let's try this. Press 1, do this. You chose 1 doing this, exactly what we want. 2, you chose 2 doing that. 3, you chose 3 doing something else. Let's say we pressed 4, unknown option, try again. But notice how we don't get out of the loop. We don't want to get out of the loop, right? We want to ask them to enter Q if they want to get out. So at this point, we can press an uppercase Q. And there it is, goodbye, and the program's finished. Okay, really, really common use case is this idea of menu-driven programs. You want to display that menu the first time, ask the user for the selection, and basically use an if ladder here, or a switch statement would work here. Try rewriting this program using a switch statement. You'll see it's pretty easy to do as well. Same logic, really. Okay, so that's pretty much it. In the challenge exercise at the end of this section, we're actually going to do stuff when the user presses 1. We're going to use a vector. You're going to be adding things to the vector and displaying the vector elements and so forth, depending on what they choose. Okay, so that's the end of this video. I encourage you, like I said, to walk through this and tweak it and change this to an or and see why it doesn't work. Understand that. That's really, really important. That's a very common mistake. All right, I'll see you in the next video.